From VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship, this is episode 7 of Circle of Willis, where I chat with neuroscientist and neurologist Marco Iacoboni about his experiences being at the center of the emerging science of what Marco calls mirroring. Marco's work helps us understand how we empathize with others and may even yield some clues about what constitutes the self. Hey everyone, it's Jim Cohn. This is my podcast, Circle of Willis. Thanks for being here. The end of a busy semester. I'm not sorry to see it go. I love everybody that I worked with, all the students, but it's always a good time of year when you enter the holiday part. The holiday part is here, and I'm happy about it. Okay, look, in this episode, I'm chatting with Marco Iacoboni, who's one of my favorite people on the planet, and who, in my own informal poll, has one of science's most enjoyable names to say out loud. Try it out, Iacoboni. It's a good one. Marco's one of those. He's an MD, PhD. He's one of those guys because he's a neurologist and a neuroscientist. Currently, Marco is a professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, which is, of course, the University of California at Los Angeles, which is on fire as I record this. And I'm really, really sad about that. I love LA. One of those people that loves LA, love California. I hope those fires get taken care of soon. And I'm thinking of all my friends out there who might be affected negatively by that. Now, Marco, at UCLA, Marco is also the director of the Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation Laboratory, which is a place within the Amundsen Lovelace Brain Mapping Center. Whew! It's a lot of places. UCLA is busy. Lots going on there, and Marco's in the center of all of it. And he's been in the center of things for a long time. In the late 1990s and early aughts, Marco sort of became famous for his work on mirror neurons, as we talked about it at the time. These are the neurons in the brain that become active not only when you do something, like, I don't know, like grab a tomato or something, but also when you see someone else doing that thing. The idea is that the sort of coupling between enacting a behavior, doing something, and observing that same behavior, that coupling in the brain, that may be a large part of how we understand the experiences and even the intentions of others. And it might actually underlie how we empathize with others. Now, Marco would probably say he studies the mirroring system or the mirroring behavior of the brain more broadly, because unlike some scientists working in this area, he doesn't really study the activity of specific neurons themselves, but rather the behavior of millions of neurons activating simultaneously. And he does that using brain imaging technology like PET imaging or fMRI. And more recently, he's been studying not only how our brains mirror the behaviors of others, but also how we control that mirroring, how our brains work to sort of keep the mirroring we do from sort of running amok and causing us to simulate just about everything we see. And it turns out that control is pretty important too. We'll talk about that a little bit in our conversation. In the process of doing all this, of course, Marco has written volumes of important scientific papers, including a very famous one published in the journal Science back in 1999 or so. I think that was when it was, called Cortical Mechanisms of Human Imitation. And this paper is sort of part of the DNA of the scientific study of empathy and human social cognition these days. So that's good. But Marco has also written a fantastic and really highly readable, really relatable book for the general public that I recommend strongly to anyone interested in the human mind generally and anyone interested in human empathy more specifically. This book is called Mirroring People, The New Science of How We Connect with Others. And as I said, it's excellent. I encourage you to go get it and read it. All right? There are a lot of things. There's just so many things I want to say about Marco. I like to talk about people, and I want to talk more about Marco, but I'm conscious of the fact that I'm as I go on and on with these opening monologues and introductions, it keeps you from the actual man himself. It keeps you from the conversation. So I want to get through this, but I do want to say, look, I met Marco, I guess, for the first time in the Netherlands, I think, 2 or 3 years ago at a conference we were both attending, and I instantly liked him very much because he's funny and warm and friendly and up for discussing just about anything from neuroscience to culture to art and existential philosophy, which, by the way, Marco and I seem to end up talking about nearly every time we get a chance to chat with each other. I don't really know what that's about, but in fact, Marco often reminds me of this great picture. I posted this on my Twitter page for Circle of Willis a couple days ago. This great picture I once saw of the existentialist Albert Camus in this really great suit, and he's dancing while smoking a cigarette. And somehow that blend of existential awareness and dancing and smoking, that blend of thinking and recreating goes a long way towards summarizing Marco's personality for me. And so that's maybe an efficient way to describe what Marco is like, in addition to his prodigious scientific output. All right, I could go on and on with stuff like this, but I really don't want to keep you waiting any longer for the man himself. So friends and acquaintances and people who I have no idea who you are, here's my friend, Marco Iacoboni. I hope you have as much fun with him as I did. So good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, it's here in DC. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, last time we were in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, right? That was what, 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
2.5.
Let me start at the beginning. I want to ask you. I've never really asked you the question of where, what your story is. You got educated in Italy, undergrad?
Yeah, back in Italy. I grew up in Rome.
You're from Rome.
Rome, yeah.
Jeez, that's so incredibly romantic.
I know.
My life sucks. I wish I was from Rome.
Such a beautiful
I'm from
city.
Silver Spring.
I don't even know where it is.
Of course you don't. It's a suburb
okay.
of DC.
Oh.
You're from Rome. That's awesome.
That's such
what
a
part of Rome?
beautiful
You were like born in the Trevi Fountain or something? As a kid?
Yeah, found
Yeah.
like a newborn.
Right. Yeah. So you're from Rome.
I'm from Rome.
That's your hometown.
My hometown. I was there like a week ago, and it's a beautiful city still. I love it.
Wow.
Rome by night blows my mind.
Oh
it's
my
so
God.
beautiful.
I've never been.
Oh, you should go.
I know I should go. Now.
You should go now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Before I die.
For sure. Well, hopefully you're not going to die anytime soon. But
why do you bring this out of me? All right. So you're from Rome, and you went to school in Rome?
I went to school in Rome. I went to medical school over there.
Uh-huh.
Then on my first class of neurophysiology, I fell in love with the brain. I wanted to study the brain. And in Italy, we don't have an MD PhD program combined. So, and I was also a specialist in neurology, but I felt I needed to have a stronger formal teaching in neuroscience. And so I got a PhD in neuroscience too while I was there in Rome.
Just along the way?
Along the way. While I was, I was seeing patients and I was a neurologist.
And did you have kids or anything like that at the time?
Not at that time. No, that takes.
So you had some more time available to you to get a PhD and an MD in neurophysiology, neuroscience, and neurology.
Neuroscience, yeah. Well, I was seeing patients too. And that's actually what led me to come here because it's part of my neuroscience PhD. I wanted to also get an experience abroad in a different lab. I got a little fellowship from an Italian funding agency to go to work first with Ran Zaidel. He's a psychologist that studied with Roger Sperry the two hemispheres, the left brain.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's a lovely guy. I love him, and we've done work together.
Oh, that's terrific. And where was that?
That was in 1992.
That was in 1992, but where? Where was that at?
Still UCLA.
Still UCLA. Okay.
I wanted to do that, and I knew that on campus there was this other guy, John Masioda, who was one of the godfathers of brain imaging, and I wanted to do that too. So I started with Ran Zaidel, and then I contacted Masioda, and I started working with them.
In 92?
92,
wow.
93. Yeah.
How about that? So did you like LA right away?
No, initially I was a little shocked.
What were you shocked by?
It's so spread out. It's so different from, the layout.
That's right. You can't really, it's not a walking city so much.
Well, although now I walk from my house to my office every day. So it becomes
I know, rub it in. Actually, I do too. I do through the sleet and rain.
I feel for you. My empathy is for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mirroring. So were you... What was the state of your science at that time?
Oh, at that time, I was just at the beginning. I was just figuring out what I wanted to do. One thing that really interested me from the very beginning as an observing neurologist, and as a resident in neurology, I was seeing a lot of patients with stroke in the early hours after the stroke. In fact, our group back in the 80s was the first group that studied within 6 hours stroke patients doing angiography, doing CT. In those days, we didn't have MRI. To figure out, how to treat the patients very, very soon, which is a concept that is still valid now.
Yeah, that's right. So, wow. So you started making your mark doing that.
And by seeing the deficits of these patients, I realized that a big thing in the brain is really how the brain puts together perception and action. And that started the whole thing. And so I started looking into that and wanted to study that. I was already in LA when I ran into Rizzolatti in 95 in a meeting in Prague. And they had just made the discovery of mirror cells.
So that was really, really brand new.
Yeah, the major
Rizzolatti.
paper.
And he's such an interesting guy, too.
He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, great guy.
It's like, the Einstein.
Hilarious. and he's just, I don't know, I'm going to say something just deeply offensive now, but he's just so Italian.
He's very Italian.
Is that offensive? That's not offensive.
It's not offensive.
It's so true.
He's also, a little, the way he drives, you should see the way he drives. He's so aggressive. It's like...
So you meet him in Prague.
I meet him in Prague. He tells me about this stuff. I find it interesting. He wants to do some brain imaging on the side. And I was already at the...
Because he's doing single cell stuff.
He was doing single cell. Now he's doing everything. Now he's kind of almost retired, but... because of his fame, he's collaborating with all sorts of people doing all sorts of things.
Right.
But at that time, they wanted really to expand and do also brain imaging in humans. And that's the way he started.
So he's, just to orient people who might be listening, Rizzolatti and Gallese and some others, they start observing that, it was in primates, in monkeys. When some are doing an action, you get activity in these bundles of cells in the cortex, and when then they're observing the same action taken by another monkey, those same cells activate, and this was an enormous newsflash. I remember everybody. I was in graduate school at the time, and everybody just was shitting their pants because this now we had a neural substrate, a real mechanism for at least at the time we thought for empathy and understanding of intention and
observational learning,
observational learning, all that stuff, modeling, right?
But it wasn't. Now we tell the story like they see the phenomenon. They didn't look for it, but they found it and they realized. But the idea that some motor cells that control your muscles can respond to the side of someone else making the same action was so outrageous at that time. They took them a long time to convince themselves that they were not seeing an artifact.
Well, that's appropriate, I guess, if it's a pretty because I remember when we first started talking about it, I was at the University of Arizona, and there was a center there for consciousness studies, and there was lots of how do we know another mind? All these kinds of questions were going on. And David Chalmers was there, and Al Kazniak. And so, this hit like an explosion.
Of course.
Yeah.
And Gallese became famous going to that conference.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he told me
The
the
consciousness
story.
conference?
Yeah, he told me the whole story. I mean, he submitted
I must have been there.
98. It was 98.
Oh,
when
yeah, I was
and that's
definitely
when
there.
he also met, at that conference, he met Alvin Goldman, and they started
Oh,
working
yeah,
together.
yeah.
They had that paper in Ticks on mind reading and mirror
Mind
mirroring.
reading.
But the story was that he wasn't even going there because
Why?
they wanted him to present a poster. And he said, I'm not going to go to
I'm
Arizona.
not printing a poster.
But apparently someone withdrew that was supposed to talk. And they gave him an oral
They
presentation.
flew him out.
And then all of a sudden, everybody gets on fire with mirror neurons.
Yeah, they sure did. Wow, that's so interesting. I didn't realize. I mean, I don't know if I really remember this or not, but now that you're telling it, it seems like I do. But I remember that jolt in graduate school because I was right there. I was in Tucson for that conference and with all those people that were organizing all of that stuff.
And also Ramachandran helped a lot because he started making a big deal about mirror neurons.
That's right. And John Cassioppo, I remember, was very, very excited about that and was talking a lot, at least talking about it everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, for about 10 years, the media was in love with mirror neurons.
Yeah, and we've had some backlash, haven't we?
Yeah,
we can talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to when you're talking with Rizzolatti about the mirror neuron phenomenon, you're discussing the possibility of doing this as a brain imaging.
That's right.
Study.
Well, the problem that we had is, of course, with brain imaging, you can't look at individual firing pattern. Actually, you know that your signal is just a mix
It's
of.
Hugely
it's an indirect signal
that's right.
and comes from
it's blood flow. It's not even neural activity.
And it's in response of millions of cells.
Yes,
so
right.
how do you do a study like that?
Yeah, that seems complicated.
It was.
So, Marco, how do you do it? You're the man.
So the way we do it, first of all, let's think of the functionality of this system. What can it do?
Yeah.
And one thing it can do, if you have some areas of the brain that fire up when you make an action, when you see someone else making an action, those regions must be involved in imitation. Imitation is such a big deal in human behavior, and yet at the time, no one had done a single study using brain imaging to study imitation.
Right.
So I thought, well, first of all, let's do an imitation paradigm. Let's have some nice control conditions. Let's make some predictions. And hopefully the predictions that we make when it comes to areas that should be mirroring are also kind of anatomically compatible with the areas in which the monkey
motor cortex.
Right. Motor areas with some motor significance.
Yeah.
And that's what those were sort of loose, but in a way was the best that we could do at that time.
So what was the original study? What did you actually do?
They were just we were just imitating very silly finger movements, lifting up.
So you're lifting up but you know what? I love that. I actually give that example
because it's a very simple study.
It's so simple. That's why the thing is about brain imaging. It's that if you get at all too complex,
right,
in your contrast, then you've got multiple potential interpretations of any given contrast.
And
right?
also, but the funny thing is that we're using this very simple stimuli, which is just a hand lifting a finger, and yet at that time. There were so little. Now we're doing all sorts of wild stuff.
Yeah, I know. Love.
Or showing movies.
Right.
But in those days, people were so much controlling what they were trying to do in terms of activation that I remember a grad student at the Brain Mapping Center gets into the scanner, in the control room while I'm doing a subject and he sees my little hand moving the fingers and he looks at it. Oh, that's a very interesting stimulus. Because in those days you were doing
because you can see the hand and the finger. But I think that's appropriate. I think that was especially, it was even then still a pretty new technology. You were really at the ground level.
Yeah.
With fMRI.
And the funny story,
you had done PET stuff before that.
I'd done PET, and that was the paper we published in Science on imitation of this little finger movements was actually my very first fMRI study.
Can you believe it? Oh, man.
And it was so smooth. In 9 months.
It was great. That was great work. Dynamite work. That's like a piece of DNA that has spawned thousands of other studies. And
I'm glad you say that. I still love that paper.
It's really true.
Sometimes you read a paper that you've written years ago and you say, well, I would change this, I would change that. That paper, I wouldn't change a word. It's perfect. It's just perfect. That's
great. Well, it's a beautiful paper. And I think you should feel really proud of it.
I am. Still my most cited paper, too.
Yeah, sure. So what happens? So you do this study. You send it to Science.
I do the study in March. I
March.
analyze the data in May. I give a local seminar, because
Oh my God.
I wanted to figure out my own data. In the summer, I write the paper, and in December, it's published in Science.
Every now and then I have this experience. It's almost like flow for scientists. Like you get the idea, you just know this idea is the right idea.
Yeah.
And you do the study and everything seems to fall into place beautifully, like suddenly discovering you can dance or something.
And I can tell you one thing. I mean, maybe I just postdocs of a delusion that I have, but I remember that I had this feeling. I mean, you never know when your paper gets published in any journal, but especially in a journal like Science. And yet, when I sent that paper, I thought, I think this paper got a chance.
Going to do it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I published a lot of papers, as have you. And there are certain papers where I very distinctly remember feeling like, oh yeah, this is the one. This is going to be
This is a good one.
This is going to be a really good one.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly why it happens with some papers and not with others. I have been surprised in the past, but not that often. I sort of know which papers are the good ones.
Exactly. Well, to me, it happened at least a couple of other times. One was that after we started this work on imitation, someone sent me a paper by Chartrand and John Barge showing that people that tend to imitate automatically other people, they also tend to be more empathic.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started really to link imitation and empathy. And so we did this study that we published in PNAS with a lot of also media coverage, in which subjects are imitating or watching facial expression, and we showed this circuitry between mirror areas, the insula, the amygdala.
Yeah.
And I remember the New York Times covered it using one of the famous phrases of Bill Clinton, "I feel your pain. I really do."
Right, because you're implicating insula.
So that was the other one that when I sent it to PNAS, I thought this has a good chance of getting there. And then the one on intention, the one
and when was the PNAS paper?
Was published.
It's always hard to say PNAS.
I know.
I keep feeling compelled to say penis. And
that was in 2003, 4 years after the Science paper.
2003, okay.
And then 2 years later.
Also still pretty early.
Yeah. I mean, we had a 10-year run in which everything we were doing was like gold.
Yeah,
Nature Neuroscience.
Right. Some people complain about that. But I don't. I think it's appropriate.
About what?
About the sort of all the MRI studies in the late 90s, early aughts that were going into these high-powered journals. Because, were they really that good? Blah, blah, blah. Look, this was a new method that was giving us unprecedented access to the in vivo functioning brain.
And
almost anything would have been science-worthy.
I agree.
The fact that you were doing that work
at that time
was profound.
Yeah, I agree. And also for the first time, we were showing that neuroscience can actually do stuff that is relevant to the lives of ordinary people.
Sure, right. Which, who knew that could be true.
So that was good. That was a nice 10-year run that led me to actually write a whole book about this story because it was a nice science story. It was telling me that I've been told for many years that we are selfish beings, and actually what I was seeing with my studies that humans are actually wired for empathy. We're actually good
wired
people.
For empathy. We almost can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then we learn how to be unempathic. I think that's my theory at this point, that when we grow up, we actually use all our cognitive.
We grow wiser and more discerning.
More controlled.
More controlled. Yes. So last time we were tracking you in terms of where you are was 92. You're there on a postdoc. Right. And then you meet, Rizzolatti and all this stuff. But when do you start your job? Your actual faculty position at UCLA? Well,
for many years I was a bit ambivalent. I really still love Rome, and I wanted to go back to Rome. Yeah. But I was living in this incredible city, but also I was also in this incredible lab. And so I was looking, here and there. And I didn't get really a nice offer until, of course, you're an academic too. Until the Italians make me a good offer, and I'm telling John Masioda.
Right, you have to have the competing offer.
Yeah, I tell John Masioda, I'm going to go. And he says, no way, you stay.
Yeah, we'll let you work in the mines until you have another offer. And then we'll think about it. Yeah.
So that's the way it worked. I mean, basically I started with my official position as a professor in 1999.
Yeah. So you were doing all this amazing stuff all the way through there.
Actually, the paper also came out. The science paper came out in 1999, so everything was actually falling in the right place at the right time.
Well, man, I tell you, UCLA is such an incredible department.
Yeah.
And the resources there are amazing. The city, you got the Pacific Ocean right there. It's a sweet deal.
Yeah, and
Sir.
the Brain Mapping Center is also fun.
The Brain Mapping Center. So tell me about the Brain Mapping Center.
It's a small building, but everything, I mean, my office is there. I get out of the office and I have like 30 yards from it, my TMS lab, 50 yards from it, the Prisma scanner with HCP sequences.
Oh, man, I want to come and visit sometime.
You should come and visit.
Yeah, I really would love to do that.
invite you. I have to invite you to
There
do
you
a
go.
seminar.
Yeah. So the brain imaging lab, was that there when you started?
It was sort of there. I mean, there was a division.
It wasn't really a center, though,
No,
the way
not
that it is
then.
now.
We opened the center officially in 1998. But for a few years we had a scanner. 3T scanner was a GE scanner at that time.
Oh yeah,
was
I worked
built,
with the GE originally.
and there was nothing. I mean, basically, it was just a scanner.
Yeah.
And then we built the building around it.
Yeah, just shielding around the scanner
Exactly.
and a little tarp for keep the rain off.
Yeah. So I was doing a little bit of PET in those years, but then when we got the scanner, I started doing fMRI. But my real first
fMRI is better.
I know, definitely. There's no doubt.
It's totally, it's way easier. It's better. It's easier on subjects.
You get so many more data points.
Yeah, you
too.
get far more data. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's problems with it, but
Sure.
still.
But we can overcome those because we're so clever.
And what I'm doing now is also to use a lot of neuromodulation techniques like a TMS.
Right. Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that. But first, I want to talk to you about the book.
Mirroring people.
And so everybody buy Mirroring People. So where does the idea for the well, first of all, actually, I want to even back up a little bit from that because when I think about the years that you're starting to publish these papers, and I am aware of them. I'm studying neurophys and clinical psych at Arizona with all the consciousness crowd and my mentor John Allen, and the mirror neurons phenomenon just explodes and everybody's obsessed with them.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there starts to be this like
Backlash.
what is this really? Right? What is this really? But before we even get to the backlash, what I want to hear about is what is your experience? Yeah, I mean, I sort of wonder about people like you in the sense that you were internationally at the center of this explosive
The biggest
moment.
story in neuroscience.
The biggest story in neuroscience. What was that like for you?
It was good. Felt really good.
You're not very neurotic, are you?
Not at all.
Oh, that's a great gift. You should thank your mother. Call your mother and say, thank you for not making me neurotic.
Yeah, I mean, of course, my mother is a classical Italian mother, so it can be also a pain in the ass. But
Okay, well, fair enough. But so you were it was really a nice time.
it was a nice time. It was fun. I mean, sometimes you have a little, even too many requests for media.
Yeah, sure.
And
sure.
sometimes you would, say things that, well, I wouldn't necessarily write that. But what scientists don't understand is that if I'm a politician and a reporter covers what I'm doing,
Yeah.
you don't want the politician to cross-check what the reporter says.
That's right.
And
That's right.
With science, it's the same thing. I mean, after all, the journalist is free to write whatever they want to
Right.
write.
And
But scientists don't get it. And if the article in the media is not as precise or analyzed what we write in scientific papers, then they attribute to you.
yeah,
that
they say you messed it up.
Yeah, exactly, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous.
Of course, yeah. There's this new Alan Alda has this new the new center
I
at
met him.
Stony
He
Brook.
interviewed
Did you?
me.
Oh yeah, he probably for Frontiers and
For one of the PBS
one of the
shows.
PBS shows that he did. He's got a new center designed to teach scientists to talk to the public.
Yeah, and it's badly needed because
It's
a lot of scientists
Desperately needed. I mean, it's we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And you and I were just talking about this earlier when we were buying our bourbons.
Exactly.
We sort of had to learn it by hook or crook, as we go along.
Right.
Watching people in the audience fall asleep or
Totally.
not.
I
and it's-
learned how to do it, while I was getting interviewed.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I realized that I was really not transmitting well this concept, and I get better and better and better. The more you do it, the better you do it.
Yeah, the more you do it, the better you get at it. If you're paying attention to the feedback.
If you care about it.
If you care about it. And I think you should.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the problem, people have said that, there's lots of, social media complaining about the way that scientists sell their work to journalists. Well, come on. The thing is either your work never leaves the ivory tower because you're just too timid or too pure to talk to the media, or the media, who are not scientists, I mean, sometimes they are, and there's a lot of excellent
There's a lot
journalism
of
out there.
Good science writers.
Good science writers. Ed Yong. I love Ed Yong.
Yeah.
But a lot of journalists will take what you're telling them and mess it up.
Yeah.
And you
But
can't
it's
really
also
fault them because they're not scientists.
But it's also your fault. I mean, there's different kinds of media coverages of science work. Some it's done with such a time pressure that you can't even complain if things get messed up.
That's right.
But the more thoughtful pieces, you have time to actually talk to the science writer.
Yep.
And I think that if the article doesn't reflect the concept of the science, it's really your fault because you're not able to communicate it well.
Well, that's exactly. So that's what I was leading to, is that if scientists aren't trained to communicate in a way that preserves the core of the science itself and can be accessible to people who don't have a PhD in neuroscience, then if we can't figure out how to do that, then these mistakes are going to keep going on and on and on and on and on.
You know what I'm telling you is that when I wrote the book, I realized one thing.
Okay.
This is a book for general readers, not for scientists. And I realized...
Did you decide that early?
Yeah. That was the idea. I mean, after all, my science was well published in scientific journals, so I was ready to write for general readers. In writing the book, I realized if I really understand a phenomenon, I should be able to explain it to pretty much everyone. But oftentimes we use our jargon and what's called the purity of science just to cover up the fact that we don't understand what you're talking about.
Right. Hey, that's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about that. The jargon, because the commonest explanation for jargon is our need for precision.
Right, but it's not.
But you're saying something the opposite.
It's a code word that can mean different things for different people.
How fascinating! What an incredibly interesting point.
I mean,
after
all,
really
we're after mechanisms, right? So a mechanism can be explained in simple words if you really understand it.
Shit. That's a totally different take on it. I like that very much. I'm going to think about that a lot.
But that also means that talking to the media is important for your own mental processes, for the clarity of your mind on what you're doing, the concept the kind of phenomena you're studying, and how you explain them to yourself. And it's almost a test of whether or not you understand what you're talking about.
That's a really interesting construal of this whole process. So you talk a little bit about not only the science, but the sort of personal process of doing that science in the book. Was that sort of more autobiographical element part of explaining it, part of drawing people in?
I think so. I mean, after all, science is made by human beings. I mean, this whole idea that science is the view from nowhere, this objective kind of activity, it's bullshit. We're human beings and we have our biases, and also it makes it more relatable. I mean, if I'm not a scientist, realizing that after all, the science process is made by real people with their own, upbringing, different cultures, different ways of thinking, personalities, it makes it more relatable to the reader. So the reader enjoys it more. It's more like, a story, an adventure.
Yeah, one of the things that, and I think this partly comes out of like fiction and stuff, the depiction of the scientist as this, sort of mildly crazy, socially awkward,
lab
coat, there is some of that. Yeah. I'll never forget seeing my chemistry professor in the grocery store in undergraduate school, walking around. He was holding a melon, and he looked like he was inspecting it for ripeness or something. And his safety goggles were still up on his head. So there's an element of that. It's kind of hard to deny. But in actual fact, the diversity of types of people in science is exactly a reflection of any other domain that I've ever seen.
And it's part of the story. I mean, it's to understand the whole scientific process. You have to understand the people that make it.
That's right.
Because science is made by human beings.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And this is one of the reasons that I want to do these recordings, because I think that even reading a newsprint article, you don't get access to the person very well.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's why we also travel, right? Why would we visit other labs? Because reading the paper is one thing, but going to the lab. I mean, you gave a wonderful talk. You mentioned Graziano. And I read his papers, but until I went to his lab, I really didn't understand. So, I mean, I know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
But seeing the videos of these monkeys.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
It was mind-blowing.
So you made a decision writing this book to include personal stories, personal anecdotes, your feelings about things.
Then also celebrating my students, because after all, that's one thing we have to remember. I mean, they do most of the work. So for almost every chapter.
After a certain point, that's absolutely true.
And actually, I'm kind of envious, because that's still the best part of the whole scientific process, doing the study.
Totally. My students, I was telling you earlier, my students run circles around me now in terms of data analysis with MRI data. Just the advances they're taking, and I know that someday they're going to experience what I'm experiencing.
Of course,
their students are going to lap them. It's just sort of how it goes.
Yeah.
Right. But this last year, I had an incredible experience. It's like going home to relive your youth for a minute. For a week. My EEG system just went belly up, and I had to fix it. And I did. Went and I did myself. I went in there. I worked on stuff. I put it all back together. I took it apart. I sent some of it out to be repaired. And oh man,
I must have been a very good feeling.
It was such a great feeling. I mean, there was stress about it because I wasn't doing all this other stuff that I do now. I put that on hold for a little while, but I sort of gave myself a couple of months to just work on my stuff in the lab.
And that's
awesome.
The flow stuff. And
why
it's so rewarding, because you have an immediate feedback. I mean, you fix your EEG system, and you see that you fix it right away.
Right. You can see
it's
you
not
did
like
the thing, and now it's doing the stuff.
It's not having an idea of a paper and sending the paper out 4 years later and getting a review back 10 months later. It's such a delayed gratification process.
I know.
You really must love doing the science to actually, because the gratification.
Do you remember doing your dissertation?
I do. I loved it, actually.
Did you?
I mean, at that time, I was even more, I was very idealistic. I thought I was the luckiest guy on earth. I was doing this beautiful thing. Remember, years before, I was treating patients, which I loved. I love also the human relations, but I love the science a little more. And I thought, this is so great, because, when you see patients, it's also a grinding kind of activity.
Yeah. You love immediate feedback and things like that.
I felt it was great to be able to just sit down and write a dissertation about the experiments you've done, you devised, and
it is
findings.
Great. I should never complain, but I do all the time.
So I felt really good about it, and I didn't have any complaining or nightmares about my dissertation.
Yeah, good. So you wrote your book, you sent it in. How'd it go?
Well, actually, I was almost kind of forced to write the book, because the media was following my research all the time, and at some point John Brockman sent me an email in which he says the title of the email is "Your Next Book."
Wow.
And he explains his whole agency. Of course, I already knew him. I knew he was the biggest agent for scientists.
The super agent.
And then
John
I thought,
Brockman.
then maybe I really have to write this book, because I knew that writing a book, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of work.
And it's a really different kind of work.
It's a very different kind of work.
It's not
and it's
writing an article.
It's a lot of work.
Oh, geez.
And I'm kind of a lazy guy, actually. So, but when Brockman sends you an email like that, you want to meet the guy. I met the guy. I thought he was a riot.
He's in L.A.?
He was in L.A. I mean, he's based in New York, but, he travels a lot. And at some point, he's visiting L.A. He's in L.A. and we have lunch together. I find the guy very charming and fun. So, and then he says, well, then write this book proposal. And I say, okay, I'll think about it. I was really still convinced about it. But then it's Christmas time, and, there's, things slow down. A little extra time. I'm always the first one to wake up in the house. And in 2 mornings, just 1 hour each morning before breakfast, I write my proposal and I send it in. I go skiing. I'm in Colorado skiing. And Brockman calls me. And he says, we love your proposal.
Wow.
So we're going to actually send it out, but we should send it out at the right time. And I say, well, Sandra Blakeslee is actually writing a huge spread on the New York Times about mirror neurons. And so I told him, well, maybe you want to send it out around the time.
Around that time.
And he says, around that time, we send it out the same morning that the article
it's like when
comes out.
It's like when they send a satellite out into space. They try to round it past Jupiter to take advantage of the slingshot gravitational.
That's what he does. I mean, the article comes out the same morning. He fires up, my proposal to all the publishers in New York. And I got lucky because two publishers actually started bidding against each other.
Wow.
So I got a very nice beefy contract, and I never written a book before. And so after I signed the contract, you know what John Brockman tells me?
What?
Now I feel empathy for you. You have to write a book.
Oh, geez. Now you got to write a book, and it's better be good, man. Don't mess that one up.
And it was a little unsettling. I mean, writing a book is a very different story than for lay people than writing an article or a grant application.
Uh-huh.
But then I enjoyed the process too. I enjoyed it so much that I thought I'm going to write another book very soon. And it's now 10 years later, I haven't written a second book. And people keep asking me, why not?
Yeah, why not? I'm
and
asking you right now.
And I have the answer. The answer is I need to fall in love with the story. Because, I mean, the story of mirroring people, I really fell in love with it.
Right.
I really, in spite of all my being hesitant because I knew it was a lot of work, it was a different kind of work, I thought it's an important story to write. And until I have that meaningful kind of relationship with another story, there's no sense.
You've got plenty of work to do.
Oh, yeah.
You got lots of stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect sort of heuristic to use to decide to do something so large.
Right.
You know, I think it's great. It makes perfect sense to me. So how was the process of writing the book? Was it, I mean, clearly it's different from writing a scientific article.
Yeah, that was also the other thing that initially concerned me because books, you know, they're kind of broad kind of objects in a way, verbal objects. But then when I wrote the proposal, I realized, wait a minute, I know everything that I'm putting down in the proposal. I don't have to do research. I don't have to, kind of stretch myself and talk about stuff I don't know. I really know everything. Every chapter, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's a beautiful feeling. That's flow.
For me, it was. I mean, it was, it's still, you have to get better. It was initially a little tough, but it was still.
Well, and the other question I have, I mean, I know plenty of people like John Haidt is a friend of mine, and other people have written books. I know the process of working with an editor can be challenging too.
That's right. I was a little concerned about that too.
Yeah.
But then I realized I got lucky. I got this freelance guy that I had, and he was a sports writer.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
I thought, if he gets it, it's probably perfect. But you never know. I mean, working with others, we have this idea that, when you write, it's your own work.
Yeah.
And that can't be diluted or changed by other people.
It's my art. It's my soul.
But actually, that's another thing we have to read. It's a delusion. I mean, the best work comes from collaboration. After all, I mean,
think that's really true.
It's your science and my science that actually tells us that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's all about collaboration. So why?
So I'm actually
But then there's artistic integrity, you see.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But my first draft, I wrote it all. But then I realized that, I really needed someone else that would make it. And he made very few changes, but the few changes he made, just shuffling things around and adding a few things here and there.
It makes sense.
Perfect. It was just perfect. And I didn't change really anything about the substance of the book. It made it just better. The idea that you write by yourself is just, again, a romantic delusion of the centuries ago. And it's really good. I mean, so what I'm saying is that if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking of writing a book, you've never written a book, don't be afraid of being edited. It's actually a good experience.
Well, okay, so you write the book, that's out. You are the mirror neuron guy,
Mr. Mirror Neuron.
Mr. Mirror Neuron for humans, certainly. I mean, you're whenever anybody thinks that phrase, mirror neurons, we think Marco Iacoboni. So,
especially in the lay people,
because that's right.
My science was covered a lot by the media, and because my book is probably the most accessible book on mirror neurons.
Right, I think
a lot of people outside the neuroscientists, when they think about mirror neurons, they think more about me than Rizzolatti, which is kind of, I feel bad about it, but
well, it depends on whether you're. I mean, it's sort of like people that know late versus early Rolling Stones. It's like you're later Rolling Stones, he's earlier Rolling Stones, but one of the things I wanted to ask you to help me understand is the backlash, the mirror neurons. I mean, there was a popular book just a couple of years ago out. About
the myth of mirror neurons or something.
The myth of mirror neurons, right? Everybody's passing it around social media because it's sort of like it's sort of like the fashion now to disprove a thing.
Yeah, but actually, there is nothing that the book actually disproved. First of all, it comes from a very simple paper that the same author wrote for Jonaka and Neuroscience, and the book is just an expansion of that.
Who's the author again? I can't remember. Do you remember?
Greg Hickok.
Oh, yeah, Hickok. Right. Yeah.
But the idea is that, there's no myth. The mirror neurons it's a real phenomenon. It's demonstrable.
But I guess the way that I've heard the controversy is it that there are specific neurons that are for the purpose of mirroring, or is it that it's a thing that neurons in the brain do?
Is that really a question that makes any sense at all? We know that the brain...
Well, in the sense that there might be other neurons that never mirror.
Oh, yeah. That's possible. We don't know about that. But certainly my idea is that neurons become mirror. And they acquired the property of being mirroring in the sense of responding to the same action that they code motorically.
I see.
But it's probably...
But is mirroring just a thing that brains do? Or
it's
is it
a process.
Things
it's more
that
like
brains have as in like a Lego piece that is the mirror part.
No, I think it's more like a process. I think that when I think about the brain, it's always like that. I don't think that the brain. We know there's amazing plasticity in the brain. We know. And when I went to med school, that was many years ago, I was told that you reach a certain age and you can only lose neurons. We know that that's not true
that's
anymore.
Not true, right?
In the adult brain, you can induce neurogenesis with stimulation, with other things.
Yeah. That's
so
right.
neurons are plastic properties. They change their own responses. And so actually that's the way I think about mirror neurons. So say in ontogeny, I'm the baby, you're the caregiver. The baby smiles, the caregiver can't help, smiles back at the baby. And the baby's brain is very simple to make through associative learning a connection between making a smile and seeing someone else smile.
I see.
So mirror neurons are born right there.
Right, but it's still I guess in that sense the designation of one set of neurons versus another. One set of neurons is mirror neurons and the other is not mirror neurons might be because the mirror neurons are the ones that have had that associative learning.
Right.
They're not necessarily phylogenetically,
No,
they're in the right place at the right time for having that mirroring interaction.
Right, but that's a very simple. After all, mirror neurons are defined by the physiological properties they have. Think about the simple and complex cells of Hubel and Wiesel. They're just pyramidal neurons, and they have these properties.
Yeah. Well, I guess, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. So in that sense, how would it be possible for mirror neurons to be mythical unless you're stuck thinking about them in that way that I've been describing? Like there is a kind of neuron that only is a mirror neuron.
I think Hickok and others that were critical of mirror neurons were mostly critical of some of the interpretations about mirror neurons rather than the phenomenon is there. There's no doubt it's actually very compelling. And it's very pervasive. And actually, I think it's very important because it's a way to show how the brain assimilates the self and the other.
Yeah, right. I always have a minor religious experience whenever you mention it. Well, that's great. That's really illuminating. That helps me a lot understand sort of the issue, because when I watch people in social media discussing mirror neurons and sort of having that, fashionable sneer around, the use of mirror neurons or discussing mirror neurons, I think that what they're doing is they're reacting to a sort of cartoon caricature of what it is. Rather than
most people don't even know what the controversy is about, but because they know that there is a controversy, which is actually totally artificial, they think, wow, no, this stuff is unclear.
Yeah.
But the stuff is completely reproducible in every lab.
Okay, moving on from the mirror neurons era. You're still obviously interested in mirroring
and it's
as
actually
a process.
And what we're doing now, it's the logical follow-up. That is, if you have mirror neurons, you need to have a control system, because otherwise you'll be imitating it in other people all the time.
Right, so what's maybe differentiating you from the other?
Right, and so what we're studying is the control of mirroring. But what we're doing is to figure out how, people often conceptualize mirroring and control as completely separate kind of processes. And what we're finding out is that indeed they are actually heavily intertwined. They're always interacting. And so to give you an example, in the whole empathy and mind reading and social cognition kind of world, people kind of differentiate between mirroring or emotional contagion sort of behavior, which is a very fast sort of behavior a la Kahneman. With, mentalizing and mind reading, which is a slow, more flexible, more deliberate kind of behavior. And again, people talk about these things also almost as they're completely independent. And we're finding they're not. That is, even when when I see you falling from a bike and I have this immediate reaction, which is like emotional contagion kind of reaction, some of my mentalizing and mind reading processes are going on. And even when I'm doing tasks that on the face of it have nothing to do with mirroring, like sending money to Africa because I realized that they need money and I have some extra cash. Which seems a very deliberate and
that's very, very, well, it was top down, right?
Exactly. Then even that kind of task probably relies a lot on my previous sensory motor experiences that I had with other people and in which I was using a lot mirror neurons.
Yeah. So some people I've heard talk about theory of mind, the understanding another mind in a very sort of higher level cognitive model, starting with a sort of a seed of being able to do what other people do.
Right.
And that informs the sort of the cognitive schema, if you will, of how other people might think or might be feeling.
But for a long time, people have actually constructed this idea there are two systems: a system for very
system
fast,
1 and system 2,
exactly,
right?
The
Kahneman stuff, yeah.
But I don't think that's the case. I mean, I would translate system 1 and system 2 into bottom up and top down.
So what do you mean by bottom up and top down?
Bottom up is like I look at your face and my perception immediately start triggering a lot of simulations inside my brain.
You just start sort of reacting.
Right. And so that's the bottom up kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
But then you need the top down in the sense you need to control all this stream of information, because otherwise if that stream of information is not controlled, it's going to actually control your own behavior. And you still want to be in charge of your own behavior.
Right. This is the big human innovation. This is cortex.
Exactly.
Right? That's the cartoon anyway.
The classical cognitive control.
Yeah.
So these two things, rather than, and often people when they talk about these things, I have the feeling they talk about these things in a very static way. And these are actually continuously interacting processes. And again, even when you're doing a task that on the face of it seems to actually activate only type 1 or only type 2, most likely you're having top-down, bottom-up interactions all the time.
So when we're interacting with someone, what you're saying is that mirroring is happening all the time, and control of mirroring is happening all the time, so that we don't just start doing what everybody else is doing.
Correct.
I've often wondered about that because, if you think about the immune system, for example, the big task of the immune system is to know what particles in my bloodstream are me and what ones are not me. Right. And so I always think about that when I think about mirroring and stuff like that, because it seems like that is just sort of recapitulated higher up in the central nervous system. And so you and I are, and so many people are so interested in and enchanted by the idea of encoding the other as me. But of course we can't do that all the time or we'd become crazy.
Right. And yet, but the interesting thing is that if these top-down, bottom-up interactions are happening all the time, we often construe control as a deliberate kind of process. I'm controlling myself.
Right.
And, I'm planning to do certain things. That's the classical control mechanism, right? But what we're saying is that actually a lot of the control that is going on, it's implicit. It's not something that we have a deliberate plan to make it, but it's still happening.
Well, that messes with the bottom-up, top-down distinction a little bit, doesn't it?
No, it makes, it gives you a different perspective on what control is. Think about...
It's built in, it's baked in to the system.
Yeah, it's almost, it's a habit. Think about, a sporting activity. My favorite activity is, of course, tennis. Everybody knows that I'm a tennis player.
You play every day, right?
I play every day in Southern California.
You walk to work in Southern California. You play tennis every day.
It's a blissful life.
Yeah.
But the point is that if you want to really improve your tennis game, you really have to practice a lot, right? And that means you're going to be able to control your shots. But you do that in a very implicit way. You don't do it saying, I'm going to hit the forehand this way rather than that way.
Right.
You just practice it in a certain way. And through repetition, you improve your control.
And do you see shifts in what controls that top-down process from one part of the brain to the other as it becomes more of a habit?
We haven't seen it. I'm pretty sure those shifts happened, but we're not. We haven't. Those studies, as you know, are complex to do.
They're very complex, but I'm sort of obsessed with them. I want to see that it moves from like lateral PFC, to medial and motor cortex and basal ganglia. Or something.
Yeah, that requires a lot of, it's a complex kind of study, but that's something that eventually we will be doing too.
Yeah, I wonder about with things things like meditation and stuff too.
Yeah, meditation certainly probably changes that. I'm pretty sure that meditation.
Yeah.
But one thing we're doing now with this story of control is to try to modulate it. I mean, we have this nice tool called TMS, and figuring out which regions are doing control or mirroring, we can suppress the activity in those regions, and we can see whether people knock them out, and see where people become more empathic, more generous. And we have two nice results that show exactly that. We reduce group prejudice. You know, if it
you sort of out group.
Yeah,
prejudice
we do an out
manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. So people are reading 2 essays of immigrants of the United States, and one is in favor of the states, and the other one is against the United States, and they get ranked. But when we suppressed medial prefrontal cortex.
Why medial prefrontal cortex?
Well, medial prefrontal cortex is a very interesting area for a number of reasons. We know it's important for current control. We have some evidence from our brain imaging studies that indeed that region seems to be really important for controlling mirroring.
I see.
So that's why we
mirroring would make people more empathic.
Exactly.
Even if you're not observing someone?
Even if you're not observing someone.
Okay, right. So even then, you sort of play a simulation.
The way I'm thinking about it is that when you think about people, even when you think about people in a very abstract kind of way and in a very cursory kind of way, you can't help it, but you're going to rely on the sensory model representation you had with your real life interactions.
So you're using transcranial magnetic stimulation to disrupt the activity of in this medial prefrontal area where there's a lot of mirroring going on while people
control of mirroring.
Control of mirroring. I'm sorry. Control of mirroring is happening. And you're having people either read a sort of pro-immigrant or an anti-immigrant kind of
and we show that we erase completely the group prejudice effect.
Yeah.
And the other thing we do is that
you erase it by removing control.
By removing control, so increasing the mirroring. So one thing we know about empathy in humans is that empathy is strong within a social group, but it drops dramatically outside that social group.
Yeah.
So if I look at you as someone outside my social group, I have very little empathy for you.
Yeah.
But that's because of the control, we think.
As we talked about this too. The ages-old debate about whether we're sort of intrinsically good or intrinsically bad. One way you could phrase it: do we intrinsically empathize, or do we intrinsically cast out people who are unfamiliar? This seems to suggest that we have to learn to control our intrinsic empathizing with people.
My recent
we have to learn out groups.
Exactly. I mean, my recent study made me think that our default mode is to be empathic, and then we learn how to become unempathic, at least for certain kinds of people.
Oh boy! Why do you think? I mean, it sort of makes sense that people can be dangerous, right? So you have to learn to discern who to judge. But it's so fascinating that the machinery that we have in place is sort of the default machinery is understand and empathize and connect.
Yeah. And as you said, it's an old philosophical debate, right? Are you born as a good person that then learns how to become a little selfish, or are you born as a selfish individual that then learns how to be prosocial because you live in a society?
Right.
I now tend more for the former than the latter. I think that's the data we have suggests that that's the case, that we learn to become a little less empathic.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And yet you could also say that we definitely robustly have both capabilities. And so the potential to control that sort of default setting is in itself partly default. Right, it's partly what we're packaged with.
Yeah, sort of. But again, if you think from an ontogenetic standpoint, when you're really young, you have less control. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And kids play readily with people they don't understand. I mean, I see it in my own kids all the time. They go to the party or there's other kids there. There's a little moment of shyness, and then they're often dressing up like princesses or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
And they imitate each other a lot. Imitation through bodily imitation, that's the way you connect with other minds.
So one of the things that I saw in your materials for this conference was a mention of sort of existential neuroscience.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost also the last chapter of the book talks about existential neuroscience. The whole idea is that when you look in neuroscience, there is a lot of really clever people and beautiful work that is very, very abstract.
Yeah.
And this abstract work, it's important too, but I have the feeling that it tends us to believe in a sort of a platonic brain. The fact that there is the essence of the brain.
Essential
Exactly.
brain, right?
And when you think about the essence of the brain, then I can't help it but think about Sartre saying that existence precedes essence. And in fact...
Sartre. Just before throwing up, right?
Just before throwing up.
He's so nauseous from the lack of meaning.
But if you think about it, I mean, you've seen brains, right? You do new image, but they're all different. There are similarities, but there's plenty of differences.
Yes, absolutely.
And so
I even saw my own a few times.
Exactly.
It's nice to know.
Me too.
It's good to have reassurance,
And so it's important to look into individuality variation, trying to figure out how to actually study brains that are in which you take into account the individual features of the brain.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to neuromodulation, especially when it comes to using TMS, which is a technique in which you stimulate a region, but the effects of the stimulation spread through white matter tracks. So you really need to know exactly what's the wiring.
I didn't really realize that, but it makes sense. Of course, it would spread through white matter tracks.
And and it doesn't stay there. I mean, clearly we have plenty of evidence that it goes at circular level in terms of effects. And so you really need to know what's the underlying anatomy, and no one is doing that. So that's one aspect of it.
So it's sort of about really taking an ideographic view of the brain. That everybody's brains is sufficiently different that it's harder to make big generalizations than we think.
Right. And the other story
that sucks.
And the other part of the existential neuroscience story is that, my work made me think, I mean, we have this tendency to think about the brain as a computer, as a very abstract kind of machine.
Yeah.
But the brain deals with the stuff that is real, in real life, that is bodies and...
perception, action, what we can do with the world.
Exactly.
Moving my body through space.
And that's really pretty much existentialist because, it's really...
That's right. That is existential.
So these are the two reasons why I like to... I also like the existentialists. They're fun people.
The existentialists are great. We were talking about the difference between Sartre and Camus. And I think we're both Camus fans.
Yeah.
Because Camus liked to dance while smoking. Yeah.
I like that
That's
too.
a great metaphor for life. I think we should all do that because we're all going to die. Eventually.
Alone.
No, but that's the thing. I'm not sure that they were right. I think Sartre said a lot about, he emphasized the dying alone. They were all sort of dramatically proclaiming the lack of meaning in the world, but I don't quite buy it.
No, I don't buy that too. I mean, I think actually life and what you do, you create the meaning.
You create the meaning. You manufacture the meaning.
And it's very important for motivation. I mean, doing stuff that is not meaningful to you, it kills you. It just kills you. Whereas whenever you do stuff that is meaningful to you and to others, hopefully, then it's really something that you want to do. You don't have to have the extra motivation to do it.
Yeah, because you're not seeking your reward. Your reward is right now.
It's right there.
Right now. Well, dude, that sounds like a perfect description of the way that you're living your life and you're doing your science and you're doing your work.
That is, I'm pretty much mirroring my life in my own work.
Yeah, you're mirroring your life in your own work. Yeah, you're really seizing the day, like the existentialist would have it. So, you're perhaps the world's quintessential existential neuroscientist.
I love that.
All right. Well, thanks, man. This was
great.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. That's a wrap. I don't know what that made me laugh. I don't know why. That's kind of funny. It was like a cliche. I've never said that's a wrap before. All right. Thanks to Marco Iacoboni for chatting with me and clearing a few things up there. It's good to hear his views on mirroring and empathy and the brain's construction of the self and sort of how the brain differentiates the self from the other and on and on. I could go on and on with that stuff. And also really interesting to hear about his experience becoming a science superstar, which is something, the thing is, as enjoyable as Marco is in that recorded conversation, I still wish you could all just spend some actual time with him. Marco Iacoboni is he's just a really fun guy to spend time with. Truth is, I could have let the recorder go on and on that day, and maybe that's what I'll do next time I see him. I'll just sort of follow him around with a handheld recorder, catching everything. That That'd be fun. Anyway, thanks again, Marco, for a fantastic conversation. I owe you, pal. Folks, the music on Circle of Willis is written by Tom Stouffer and Gene Ruley and performed by their band, The New Drakes. For information on how to purchase their music, check the About page at circleofwillispodcast.com. Don't forget, also, that Circle of Willis is brought to you by VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. And that Circle of Willis is a member of the Teej FM network. You can find more about that at teej.fm. Now, if you like this podcast, how about giving us a little review at iTunes, letting us know how we're doing? It is actually easy. I say that every time, but I mean it. I swear to God, it is easy and we like it. Or you can send us an email by going to circleofwillispodcast.com and clicking on the Contact tab. You just give us a little message there. In any case, I will see you all at episode 8, where I'll be talking with psychologist and fellow podcaster Samin Vazir of the University of California at Davis about the stability of personality and the various recommendations of the replication movement in science generally and psychology more specifically. Until then, bye-bye.